Senior Connections. This is our monthly look at all things that relate to older adults and their families. The show is brought to you by Senior Resources, which is your local area agency on aging serving Muskegon, Oceana, and Ottawa counties. And we come to you every month with a different topic that relates to older adults, their families, their caregivers, and we hope to give you some information on the wide variety of services and programs that are around here in the community that will help you navigate the older years of your life or somebody else's life. And so I am really excited to have back with me today my guest and my good friend Dan Bonner from Legal Aid. He is the managing attorney of the local Muskegon-based Legal Aid office. Thanks, Dan, for coming.
It's a pleasure being back,
Well,
Lisa.
it's been a couple of years, and you and I go back a few years to where we were mere toddlers, it seems. And we've known each other for over 25 years through Human Services in Muskegon. So I know you well, but let's remind our viewers a little bit about your background. Let's not go all the way back to high school, really. But when did you come to Legal Aid? And let's start with that.
Yep, started Legal Aid in May of 1983, Lisa, out of Wayne State Law School, and been there ever since. And
In the Muskegon office?
In the Muskegon office, yep. And the job, maybe some of the viewers don't know about Legal Aid,
let's
but
talk about that.
our office represents basic lower income and senior citizens, people 60 plus, in the counties that you mentioned, and we do only civil cases. We don't do criminal cases or fee generating cases. Just mostly landlord-tenant, divorce where there's physical violence, consumer, and what we're going to talk about today is I do some work with seniors in what's called estate planning or getting their documents in order.
Okay, and we are going to talk about that. But let's talk a little bit, what made you decide to go into this work? Because anybody who has been in the legal field knows there is money to be made in law. Not necessarily that Legal Aid is, it's not going to set you up for life. I mean, financially. You're doing fine. He's not poor. But what makes, you have to have a passion to do this work.
Absolutely.
Because law can be very financially lucrative, as many things can, but you obviously have to have a passion. And so what got you into this line of work, and what brought you to Muskegon? Because this isn't where you're originally from, as I recall.
The one thing about Legal Aid is it's you don't make a great living, especially when you start out as a legal aid attorney, but you make a great life, and that's what I came here for. I'm a child of the '60s, and some of our viewers probably enjoy some of the same oldies that I enjoy, and I think it was bringing that passion for social justice and a concern for, changing the world as we tried to do back then. Brought that with me to Legal Aid, and still have the passion, but I've adjusted my expectations about saving the world.
So now it's just your little corner of the
That's
world
exactly
that you're going
right,
to do as well. And I know, of course, that your lovely bride, Dolores, also is an attorney with Legal Aid in the Holland office.
Correct.
So did you meet through your work? Not we're going to get into all that detail, but...
Yeah, we did. In fact,
so that was a great bonus of this work.
That was a great bonus. In fact, I tell people, Dolores, on September 19th of 1990 was my best interview ever of a new lawyer. Yes, yeah.
That developed nicely. Well, wonderful. So now let's talk a little bit. Well, let's do some broad things about Legal Aid, and because it is making a big difference, it's super important for older adults, but for all kinds of lower income people as well. So let's talk a little bit about that focus. Why did Legal Aid exist? And it's not just in our little corner of the world either.
That's correct. In fact, the Legal Services Corporation that established legal aid programs throughout the United States, Lisa, was a bill signed into law by President Nixon.
Oh, wow.
8 days before he resigned.
One of the last really great things he did.
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
Let's try to remember him for that rather than what happened 8 days later, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and so why do you think that happened?
Well,
you were a child then, I
Yes, mere lad. What Legal Aid does is, of course, since 1963 in this country, people charged with crimes have a constitutional right to an attorney.
Right.
And our viewers see that on cop shows all the time. You have the right to a lawyer if you can't afford one, etc. But in civil cases, some of the cases I mentioned previously, there's no right to a lawyer, but those cases are not less complicated. And so legal aid programs have been established nationwide. Every county in the United States is served by a legal aid program.
So it's interesting because it's really around the same time frame that Area Agencies on Aging happened, which started in 1973, and in Muskegon this one started in 1974. So we're very similar times
Yes.
in the same thing. Every county in the United States is served by an Area Agency on
wow.
Aging. So
Interesting
who knew how
coincidence.
closely
Yeah.
our two programs were aligned? So, so let's talk a little bit more. But so you're not the only attorney in the Muskegon office, but how many are there roughly that are serving this area?
Yeah, we have a staff of 5 attorneys now, but we serve 6 counties out of the Muskegon office.
Okay.
And our formal name is Legal Aid of Western Michigan. We have headquarters in Grand Rapids and cover 17 counties in the west side of the state, all the way down to the Indiana state line.
Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about the affordability of it, because as you mentioned, in criminal cases, you do have the right to have somebody appointed, but it doesn't mean that civil cases are any less important, and sometimes, especially when you're talking that there's domestic violence involved,
Right.
it's every bit as important, and possibly, certainly to that person might be more important than a criminal defense thing would be. So what do you do to help people who can't afford what can be a high cost?
Well, we jump into cases where our clients, where there's the most need, because we can't possibly meet the demand, the requests we get for service. So we do mostly in the family law cases, mostly kind of emergency basis. People are being subjected to physical violence. I've had 2 clients over the years who have been murdered by their intimate partners. Custody cases, you mentioned too about how important these cases are to people. I used to do criminal defense years ago. I have clients who are more concerned about keeping custody of their children than I had clients in the past about going to jail. Yeah.
That's not really surprising to me, I guess. So let's talk again specifically, let's bring it down to older adults. So you and I are both part of the Tri-County Protection Team, which is an organization of many different kinds of community agencies, law enforcement, the prosecuting attorney's office, that are all related to scams and abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, financial,
Correct.
mental, all kinds of abuse. And we're trying to educate the community, working together to offer seminars, a lot of times, education, all kinds of things. So what kind of things can you do from a legal aid standpoint that help in that work protecting people?
Right. We have, and you're right, we have 2 components to this Tri-County Task Force that we're called the prevention education components, where we work a lot, especially with seniors, bankers who are on the front lines of many times these financial abuse scams, police officers, et cetera, to try to educate seniors to not become victims
alert
of
and
these. Exactly.
aware of
And if
the
there's seniors
ploys.
watching, if there's nothing else you remember from this show, do not give your social security number and birth date to somebody who calls you.
Quickest way to mess up your life financially
Absolutely.
is to give into that identity
Yep.
theft.
And then we have the intervention component with this, as you mentioned, the state police, our prosecuting attorney's office has been very, very active in addressing financial scams, abuse, et cetera.
Right. So if we have time left, we'll get into some of that some more. But let's talk about things that can be really important to help older adults and their families. That's kind of more a preventive thing, and durable powers of attorney.
Right.
So people hear that, a DPOA, or they'll hear that, and there's a financial side and a health care side. And so what does a durable power of attorney do? To me, that just sounds very legal, and that means I call Dan Bob.
Yes, the powers of attorney, Lisa, are very important planning documents, or what are called pre-planning documents for especially seniors, but they're good for and useful for everyone.
Any adult really over 18 should be talking about this.
Absolutely. The 2 types that you mentioned, when we have the financial power of attorney, and that allows a person to appoint another person to act on their behalf in financial matters. And that's done with a document, and it's important that the person who signed the document still be mentally competent. And a lot of times it's said, I have families approach me whose loved one, an elderly person, has slid into dementia, and at that point it's too late.
Right.
Too late, and then you're talking the court, guardianship, conservatorship.
Okay, that was going to be my question.
Right.
So if you're already at that point with somebody,
Right.
you're going to advise them other things that they can do. You can't help them
Exactly.
with that. So
It
you're-
gets more complicated. Yeah.
Right.
And on the health side, there's a durable power of attorney for healthcare, or what we call an advance directive sometime. And that is where you have a discussion, an important discussion, with people who love you and who you love about end-of-life issues. And that can be pertinent to a 20-year-old who's been in a horrible automobile accident, or a senior who's sliding into the next life.
Right.
To make it clear what level of care do they want at end-of-life stages. And that document is very important. And what's interesting is we hear the word durable in front of this. These two documents, Lisa, are huge exceptions to the normal contract rule, where if one of the parties to the contract becomes mentally incapacitated, the contract ends.
Okay.
But the advantage of these powers of attorney, both financial and healthcare, is that the effectiveness of that document continues through the mental incompetency, usually of the person who's appointed.
And that's really why they're designed. is
Exactly.
To help that person. And so that's why we tend to think of them for older adults, but you're exactly right, we shouldn't. I mean,
Yeah.
we all need to have an advance directive, and I'm going to do a whole show on that again in the next couple of months. But we all need to be thinking about that, because we never know when a tragedy might befall us, and so we want, if
Absolutely.
we have ideas on how we want our finances to be handled, we could still have dependent children at home.
Exactly.
It's a really rough decision.
Yeah.
It's a tough discussion to have, though, isn't it?
It is.
Because even though I'm pretty sure none of us get out of this earth alive, nobody wants to talk about death.
Right.
And that's really what brings us up. So do you have any advice for people on how to do that? Do you ever have to get involved in trying to convince somebody? And it could be the older adult, it could be the child or something,
Right.
who doesn't want to think mom and dad aren't always going to be there.
Right.
Have you ever had to have those kind of discussions about why this is important? And-
We have. Most of the time, the people that come to my office are prepared to have the discussion. I've talked in more social situations where I've talked to people who approach me to talk about their elderly parents who do not want to talk about it, do not want to do pre-planning on all different kind of levels to be sure that things run smoothly, especially if they slide into mental incapacity or pass away. I've seen some just horrible messes that have been left behind because people didn't have the discussion and pre-plan.
And it's really a gift for your loved ones to do either one of
Absolutely.
these things.
Yeah.
Because I think any of us who have loved ones don't want to think that they're going to struggle and suffer trying to make these decisions. But if you haven't got it in writing, then you don't have any way to prove it. And even probably if you don't have it in writing, at least having had discussions
Right.
and knowing what somebody desires is helpful, because at some point, if somebody is unconscious or in a coma or something in a hospital, somebody has to make a decision for them.
Right.
But I would imagine that it's a really big challenge for some people to get them to want to discuss that.
Absolutely. And the one thing, too, about doing an advanced directive for healthcare is it really removes a lot of maybe guilt of the person who's making the decision, because they've had the discussion, they have a set of written directions, and they have been relieved of knowing or wondering whether or not this is the right thing to
Right.
do, because
Say,
they've been...
Mom or dad put it in writing, and here's what it is.
Yep, and I'm just doing what mom or dad
Can
wanted me to do.
alleviate family squabbles
Exactly.
over things.
Yes.
Have you ever seen a durable power of attorney abused?
That's a great question. One thing I'd want to mention to the TV audience is that if you appoint, not so much with the healthcare healthcare power of attorney, that's important, but with the financial power of attorney, I tell senior groups and I tell my clients in my office that you just signed a document that gives the key to all of your finances to a third person. That must be a person that you trust implicitly.
Right.
Yes,
You can't have any questions about that.
absolutely.
So the other thing we wanted to talk about are ladybird deeds. And so as I when we were talking about this earlier, How is that different from, the only Lady Bird I know of is Lady Bird Johnson.
Yes.
That was when I was a really young child, just
Yes.
to be clear. But is there any correlation, before that, let me ask my silly question.
There is a correlation. There's a Lady Bird Johnson, of course, maybe some of our
Former
younger
First Lady.
viewers, was the wife of President Lyndon Johnson, of course. And Lyndon Johnson used a deed to transfer some property to his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, in Texas, where they lived, reserving a power to himself to sell that. Now, it wasn't Lyndon Johnson or his lawyers who gave it that. It was a law professor named Sekulow in Florida that gave it this name, and it has become kind of the common name for a very important estate planning
So
document.
why did President Johnson do that? What was the advantage?
Well, the
Then you're
advantage.
going to tell us what the advantage is for other people, but why did he decide to do that?
Well, the advantage of Lady Bird deeds is that you can grant, it's a great probate avoidance technique.
Okay.
And some of the most popular books in the legal section of libraries is How to Avoid Probate Court.
Which is, and so we probably should tell our viewers what's involved in probate court, really. So what's the advantage of avoiding probate court?
Yep.
Cost, for one thing, right?
Yep. Great question. Cost, exposure to creditors and that. And people have a myth is out there that if I die without a will, the state is going to get a lot of my property or whatever. The only property that people have that have to go into probate court are property that's titled, to put it simply, either bank accounts, houses, homes, CDs, stocks, that kind of thing. If the only name on that document of title, of ownership, is the person who just passed away, that document has to go through the probate court and let the court decide who gets it. And that can be done one of two ways: through a will that was done before death by the deceased, or the state has a presumed inheritance scheme that, simply put, surviving spouse, if no surviving spouse, down to children, grandchildren, up to parents, out to siblings, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, it's kind of like the durable power of attorney. If you want to say in how things are going to be handled, you want to look into this Lady Bird deed, it sounds like. So what do you have to do for that?
Yep. A Lady Bird deed is a document that allows a person to, where I most commonly see them is with elderly folks, and a lot of times maybe one of them passes away, and gentlemen, the actuarial tables say we will pass away before our wives. So in our example, I'll have husband passes away, mom's the only remaining living person on that deed. Now, if she was to pass away without conveying it, then the children, assuming there's a child or children, the house has to go through probate. There are a couple of problems we talked about earlier, financial exposure to creditors of the deceased person. But also we have in Michigan, within the past few years, a statute that's called the Estate Recovery Law for Medicaid. Medicaid, and this was something that Michigan was basically forced to do by the federal government, the last of the 50 states to do it. But what was happening in the past is one home, regardless of value, is exempt for anyone receiving Medicaid payments for nursing home expenses. What happened is then the feds, whose money Medicaid is, or a lot of it, grew weary of seeing young people inheriting $2 million homes when their deceased loved one, parent or whatever, used $500,000 or $1 million, $500,000 or $1 million in health care expenses in a nursing home. So what they do now is, under this Medicaid estate recovery plan, Lisa, is the probate court computers talk to the Department of Community Health computers, looking for someone who died, who left an estate in a probate court, and also received thousands of dollars in Medicaid. And when there's a match, then the state attaches that estate in the probate court.
Oh, so then they're trying to get you to have to sell that, or somehow, or if you sell, give some of the proceeds to pay back.
Exactly, reimbursement. And the policy is perfectly understandable, but there still can be an end run around that by executing a ladybird deed. And what a ladybird deed does, Lisa, is it conveys, usually from, in our example, elderly parents or a parent, to usually adult children. But then the nice thing about it is that the grantor, the seniors, they still have a hook on the ownership interest. They reserve during their lifetime the full power to sell their property, to rent it, to mortgage it, to do whatever. But if they pass away before they sell it, then all the children have to do is record a certified copy of their death certificate in the Register of Deeds, and they have the authority without probate court to sell the home.
So now that computer doesn't talk to the
Exactly.
federal one
That's right.
because it's not, that person's name isn't attached to it if they've had that done. Wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
It's a helpful estate planning device. Now, the feds have seen people like me and colleagues.
You're on their list now.
Yeah, doing these things. Now what they're talking about is closing that loophole as well, and I get that.
You might want to do that quickly. You're going to get a mad rush of people. Again, though, if you've got plenty, it means that you've got a $2 million house, you probably aren't using legal aid for
That's
that
correct.
because you're probably not qualifying for your services. But call your own private attorney for that.
Right,
But,
yeah.
So it's a way to protect the older adult.
Yeah.
They still have their home to live in.
Yep.
It's theirs until they die.
Yep.
And then it protects the family where it can stay in the home, and it stays in the family, and then the children, after the passing of the people, one or both parents who are listed on that,
Right.
then get that to do with what they want, and it hasn't negatively impacted the older adults at all then,
Yep.
because they've still been, if they've needed to take out a second mortgage, they've been able to do that.
Right, and that's correct. Another, briefly, a Medicaid advantage is for adults to do this, it's not considered, a term is a divestment for Medicaid planning, where they're not really giving away anything of value because they still have the hook on the right to sell the place. So it doesn't disqualify them for eligibility for Medicaid if they need that.
Oh, okay.
For nursing home care. So that's another advantage of these things called ladybird deeds.
That really sounds like something very interesting. Do you do a lot of those? Do a lot of people know about them?
We do a fair amount there. I tend to, especially people with larger estates, I refer those folks to my colleagues in the legal community in the Muskegon area,
Right.
or Ottawa County or Ocean, who do this exclusively, because you get into maybe some important tax consequences and those kind of things, and tax law was never something I had much interest in.
I can see why one wouldn't. But so the people you're dealing with who are generally going to be lower income, or maybe not because they're older adults, they might be middle income, but still it could be a hardship because maybe this home is one of the last real assets they have.
That's
and
correct.
they're on a fixed income because they're dealing with Social Security or a very small pension or something, so they don't really have the means, but they have a nice house from when they worked, for example, or
Right.
just even not anything special, but a house that they want to be able to pass along to help out their kids and
Sure.
to make sure that they can
Yeah.
maintain on their own.
And the ones I feel most that I feel good about are the seniors who have perhaps a special needs adult child who's lived with them. The parents have taken care of that child older, and they're concerned for that child's well-being after their passing. And I've done some of these documents in order to allow that child then to qualify for grants, maybe for rehabilitation of the home. We in legal aid, our clients don't live in castles,
Right.
and a lot of them need some work.
And that's a great point to talk about adult children who might have disabilities, because that's probably happening a lot more than it did 40 years ago.
Right,
Probably where
yes.
people, we've just come so far in treatment of people with disabilities, and we're all living longer, that's probably a real concern out of a lot of older adults. What do I do when my adult child is going to outlive me, and how do I help set up? So do you work like with the ARC, or other organizations on those kind of things?
A little bit, but this is the kind of thing where there's a special device called the Special Needs Trust.
Okay.
And then those are the kind of things that I refer to.
People who specialize
People who
in that.
specialize. As Clint Eastwood once said in a movie, a man's got to know his limitations. And
So you've got your specialty.
I do,
so.
yeah.
All right, well, let's just talk about some other, in the last, we've got about 5 minutes, other critical legal issues that older adults might see. So what about evictions?
One of the things with seniors I often see is, and we get into a whole nother issue, is hoarding. Hoarding has become
yes.
a huge issue with, especially with, I see it more with the older population. And many times they're living in an apartment in a multi-unit building, and they're hoarding, and sometimes they're getting a subsidy from the federal government or from MSHDA, the state government, to live there. And because of the hoarding lifestyle, that it's a health and fire hazard.
And so if they're in a multiple unit dwelling, it's not just a health hazard to them.
Right.
I mean, if there were a fire, now you're talking all these adjacent, these connecting
Exactly,
walls and
yeah.
all kinds of things.
So we see that issue as well. Again, we alluded to a little earlier about scams. That when I first started practicing law years ago, I saw that people that would steal from older adults primarily were people who did not know them, would want to come usually in the nighttime, would hope that they were not home. Would not enter through a door, would maybe enter through a window or something like that, and take things and try to get out.
A typical burglar.
A burglar, exactly. Now people who are stealing from our senior citizens are walking through the front door in the middle of the day and saying, "Hi, Mom." And
That's heartbreaking.
It's
That
heartbreaking.
kind of gives me chills even just to hear that,
Yeah.
to think that somebody can do that.
And not only sometimes adult children, but caregivers, neighbors. I see that happen as well, and that's sad. Where we talked before about our Tri-County Protection Team.
Right.
That's where we intervene in those kind of
And
issues.
just recently, I remember seeing in the news something about a woman who had gone to a financial planning seminar and then she didn't have family nearby, and entrusted somebody to manage her finances, and he was convicted of embezzling tens of thousands of, I don't know if it was technically embezzling, but taking tens of thousands of dollars from her because she was trusting. And a lot of times that's what we see. Our older adults, especially if they don't have nearby family,
Right.
tend to be more trusting because they're not realizing that how easy it is to fake some accounts and to fake reports.
Right.
When we know that those kind of things have happened to big institutions in our community, nonprofits and schools, for example, that we can think of, certainly that could hoodwink an older
Absolutely.
adult. And so, again, as you said earlier, never give out your Social Security, don't give out your birth, Social Security isn't going to come calling you to ask you, hey, we've misplaced your number, what's
That's
your number?
correct.
Or you need
Yes.
to verify it to
Yes.
get benefits.
Yeah.
So when in doubt, really, they can call 911, right? Or call the local law enforcement, or what can they do if they think that somebody's trying to scam them? We've got about a minute left.
Okay. The first thing they should do is hang up. Yep. Because your bank knows your Social Security number. Social Security knows your Social Security. Your credit card company knows your Social Security number. They don't lose them.
They're not going to ask for them.
Yep. And so hanging up is the other thing is, in the closing minute, is that I tell seniors, be careful of people will call you sometimes and are very good at imitating grandchildren who are in
grandparents
trouble,
scheme.
the grandparent. And where are they getting this information? They're getting it off your Facebook page.
That's a great point. So we've got 30 seconds left, so I want to thank you, Dan. Our time always goes too quickly. We could talk a lot longer, but you can find out more about legal aid by calling 231-726-4887 or check their website at www.lawestmi.org, law for Legal Aid West Michigan. Google that. Or the best thing is always to call 211. Remember those 3 numbers, 211, and say that you need to get a hold of legal aid, and they'll do that. So thanks for joining us. We hope that you found out a lot about the Lady Bird deed and durable powers of attorney. Come and join us next month when we'll have another great topic that we hope will help you. Thanks, and have a great day.